intrigued by your mind. I'm intrigued by your looks. I'm intrigued and beguiled. I gone and read all your books. Welcome back to Mind the Future. Today we're going to be talking all about the future of gaming, and I've got just the guest for it. Joining me today is none other than Victor Lucas, the creator and host of The Electric Playground, a show that he started all the way back in 1995 and which ran on TV for over 25 seasons, reaching millions of viewers. In fact, it became the world's longest running program focusing on gaming and geek-related news, reviews, and commentary. These days, the flagship show, EP Daily, continues to live on YouTube, delivering daily news and previews spanning geek culture and covering topics such as games, toys, comics, and gadgets, while also delivering on-location footage of events, red carpets, behind-the-scenes interviews, and much more. Its spin-off, Reviews on the Run, can also be found online and delivers consumer-focused reviews, with a dose of raw honesty. To find out more, visit epn.tv or the YouTube channel at youtube.com/epntv. You can also find Victor on Twitter at Victor_Lucas. Welcome to the podcast. And I have my first question for you is,
Sure.
What draws people towards playing video games? What role do video games play in our society?
It's emotions, believe it or not. I think that there's a technical aspect to games, and there's an artistic aspect to video games, and certainly great graphics are an instant pull and an instant attraction for a lot of people. In fact, arcade games were all sort of crafted with this idea of having an attract mode where they would show off their flashy graphics, and people would walk past the arcade machines and they would see them and they would get pulled in because they were curious. Honestly, when video games first erupted, it was almost like they were playable cartoons in a lot of ways, so it was a very interesting dynamic to begin with. But then what people recognized, and I recognized early on in my career, is that it wasn't just a sense of, wow, this is cool, this is interesting, it's like a cool toy that I get to play with, and I get to bat around a ball and Pong, or blast at Space Invaders, or eat a bunch of dots and get chased by ghosts and Pac-Man. It was the emotions that well up inside you while you're playing them. And it's very analogous to playing sports, or, being on stage in a play, or public speaking. I mean, there's an anxiety and there's an excitement. There is adrenaline that courses through you. And it's all tied to our emotional connection. And what developers and game designers really recognized over time is that they could turn the dials and flip levers and try all kinds of different things to tap buttons within us that engage those emotions and certainly addict us. But I think the most fulfilling and successful games, the ones that we continue to talk about, really they play with our emotions. And so we play the games even when we're not in front of a machine, and that's a very profound thing that happened with video games as development matured and things got better. So I would say that a lot of facets go into the success of games, but central to us being drawn to them is the emotional connections that we have with them.
I have to tell you, on the topic of still thinking about them when I'm not playing, Angry Birds. Man, I could just see the birds, and I would think about how to throw them, even when I was not at my computer, which is when I quit that game immediately because I realized.
Yeah, there is also a lot of guilt associated with video games, and I think there is an obsessive quality that can happen with games for sure, and that's probably why I turned my obsession into a career. But I also feel like once you understand that and you can kind of find balance with it, you can look at video games like any other form of entertainment. And I was just thinking about that today. Like, I love movies. I started as an actor and professionally as a creative person. And I was completely blown away by Star Wars and TV shows like Magnum PI. I grew up in the 80s, and I just loved all of this fantasy stuff that was being crafted for me, Terminator and Aliens and Indiana Jones, of course. But even though I love movies and I've loved a lot of TV shows and I love comic books, I really live for games. Like games really fire up all of those things in me, because games bring a lot of the learnings that have come from movies and TV shows and radio dramas and dance and cinematography. Like all of these art forms are interwoven and adapted, and then you are a part of the art too, because as you're playing it, you're kind of crafting your own stories, and you become kind of the central star, but you're also the movie director in a way as you're playing through your experiences. But I think one of the most successful games to kind of get us thinking about playing a game while we're not playing it is probably Tetris. I think everybody has closed their eyes and seen the shapes falling and been freaked out by that. But I mean, I think that's an example of excellent design right there.
And what would you say is the biggest development in gaming technology? How has gaming evolved over your lifetime of being addicted / professionally addicted?
I think the biggest development was bringing arcade experiences into the living room. I think I was watching games mature and grow from very simple sort of bar type amusements or pinball pool hall type amusements that were captivating and fun, and they would consume your quarters, but then see a lot of that work get replicated and then eventually surpassed by home consoles, so that we could all buy a relatively inexpensive device that can play stuff that is so much better than what a lot of us grew up with in the arcades, was incredibly, mind-blowing, especially for somebody that, I started on the Atari 2600. I had Pong and stuff even before that, but the Atari 2600 was really one of the first cartridge-based home console systems where you could pop in a cartridge and you have a different experience. But most of those games were pretty terrible, and you would spend the cost for one of those Atari 2600 cartridges was still around $50 back in the early 80s. So it was a very expensive endeavor, partly because the video game companies could sort of create this message that everything was being crafted by magicians and no one could do this on their own. And we've figured out this technology, and so it's going to cost you. And it did. And you'd take the cartridge home, and sometimes it would be the box of a thing that you'd been playing in the arcade, and you pop it into your Atari 2600, and it was absolute garbage. It didn't look anything like what you had just played in the arcade. And then, technology improved and stuff just started to get much, much better at home. And suddenly the arcade became less of a pull. But I still also love the idea of the collective experience in an arcade as well. And then there are lots of companies that have stayed making cool arcade games. But I think if I had to point singularly at, the most important ingredient in the maturation of games and the success of games as a cultural means of expression, I think it's that the home consoles, really with the first Nintendo Entertainment System and its competitors from Sega and NEC and then eventually Sony with the PlayStation and Microsoft with the Xbox, they really drilled down into experiences that pulled from all forms of storytelling and state-of-the-art real-time visuals, and then of course they implemented a lot of online technology, which allowed us to connect with people all over the world and share these experiences in multitudes of ways. But I think the main thing was we got home experiences at a fairly reasonable cost that transported us to other planets and other worlds and other realms, and the escapism was profound, and they just got better and better and better. And of course, the roots of the game, the arcade game, the idea of what a lot of people still have, where you plunk in a quarter into a video game and you get 6 minutes of game time. That just seems so far removed from playing something like The Last of Us Part 2, which is arguably one of the most compelling stories I've survived, because it's so excruciating and palpable, because you're playing characters that you really care about, and that's just one example. There's tons of incredible experiences like that out there.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned in terms of being able to play with other people. So collaborative gaming, and we have games like Pokemon Go, and which actually finally got people out of their houses and maybe talking to strangers. Rock Band, Dance Dance Revolution, Minecraft. So all of these games seem to focus more on bringing people together rather than solo gaming, where that stereotype of somebody emerging from the room after a month of not showering.
Yes.
Do you want to touch a little bit about that idea of playing with others as opposed to just against others or against a computer?
Well, all of it is valuable and fulfilling and fun. And I think if one were to be playing video games today, my advice would be to try a little bit of all of it. I don't think any one aspect of it is particularly satisfying or as fulfilling as it could be. I don't think that if you're only playing multiplayer Fortnite, for example, or only playing Rock Band, or only playing single player solitary experiences, you're really getting the full breadth of what this medium can offer. And that's the beautiful thing about video games, is that they aren't the same experience every time. If you allow that, you can have a lot of the same experience. You can say, well, I only like multiplayer shooters, or I only like sports games, or I only like puzzle games. But games can, they're constantly redefining themselves. So there is definitely an era where there was no online play, and there were multiplayer experiences. And Nintendo was a big proponent of that. There was a lot of couch co-op, is what it's called, where people would play games like GoldenEye or Wave Race. Even back Super Mario Brothers games and stuff would allow for two people to play together. And it's really fun to share that experience, or a well-made experience. Like Rock Band is an excellent example. The act of pulling four people together to build a rock band is so enjoyable. And so, I think that there is tremendous reward in that shared experience and tremendous value. But I also think it's really cool to go off and dive into. It's almost like you're reading a book alone when you play a solo player experience that is completely captivating and engrossing. And and one of the things about video games that the video game industry itself is kind of guilty of is pitting camps against each other within its own, massive cultural space. It starts with consoles, pitting one console against another, like the Nintendo Sega war. Back even before that, it was Atari and television, and now it's Sony, Microsoft. So it starts with that, but then there's the multiplayer only people that just say, why would you ever play a single player game? There's people that love Call of Duty, which is a massive video game franchise. It's about kind of synthesizing and simulating in an arcadey accessible way, sort of the battlefield experience and the war experience. It's like an extrapolation of playing guns, when John Wayne movies were popular. It's like taking that to an interactive sense. But there's a lot of people that buy that franchise, buy that game, which comes out almost every year, and they only play one part of it. They only play the single player part of it, and they think the people that only play that play the multiplayer part are kind of silly because they're missing out on the fun of the single player campaign. And then there's people that never even look at the single player campaign, and they think that's a waste of time, and they only play the multiplayer stuff, and they get very hyper competitive. And I find it all so reductive for anybody on the outside to kind of look at games and try to pigeonhole them as one thing. because I can assure you, anybody that's watching this, there are video games made for you that you will love. They come in all shapes and sizes, in all flavors, and they are extraordinarily well made and super fun and gratifying. You know, as long as you don't let them become your only thing in life. But I also feel like people within the community are can also get lost in being angry that other people like something, you know, and it's just so silly. It's highly charged, and part of that stems from the roots of the business and its desire to be competitive, you know, because there is definitely another element in video games, the esports kind of attitude of being hyper competitive and being better than other people at stuff. And so that exists on the game stage when people are playing each other, but then it can also sort of grow out of that. And so consequently, we have a lot of people that feel intimidated or overwhelmed, and they just don't want to pick up a controller. And that's wrong too. I feel like games are for everyone, and you don't have to be good at them. You know, and part of my career has been to just shine a light on the creativity and the crazy ambitions of video games, and to show that it's humans that make these things, and they make them for humans. And you know, people don't need to be nervous or afraid or judge the entirety of this massive multi-billion-dollar, you know, almost 50-year-old industry based on one title or two titles or one, you know, Twitter fight. You know, there's a lot going on here.
Well, it seems like over, I don't know, the last 10 years, the biggest development in gaming technology has been things like facial recognition, voice recognition, gesture control, graphics, displays, VR, AR, and all those kinds of things, cloud gaming. But, you know, storytelling seems to have been, in some ways, maybe even the bigger evolution.
Right.
You talk a little bit about where you think storytelling in games is going. Where are we heading there?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, we're dealing with, I mean, the highest paid storytellers and the most influential storytellers, arguably, are in Hollywood right now, making, you know, blockbuster movies like in Marvel's Avengers or Star Wars. Most of those creators have grown up with video games, and they are massive fans. And something that I recognized, you know, 15 years ago in my travels with Electric Playground is that I would visit a video game studio, or I'd visit a film effects studio, or I would talk to a movie director in their office, or, you know, actors even on red carpets. They're all the same nerd, you know, they're all into the same stuff. They have the same action figures and posters and stuff on their walls. And there's a real mutual admiration and respect. It's not the 70s or the 80s where you'd have movie studio people that came up with the studio line and only thought of their movies as sort of the zenith of you know, cultural output out there, and any other thing associated with the film was kind of this sort of the same thing. So a video game would be like a beach towel or a lunchbox or something. It's not like that anymore. You know, J.J. Abrams is making video games. Video games are being made out of. Tom Holland is going to be Nathan Drake. You know, he's coming off of Spider-Man. He's going to be Nathan Drake in the Uncharted film. The Last of Us Part 2, one of the biggest games of 2020. There's a Last of Us HBO show that's coming, and Neil Druckmann, who's the creative director on the Last of Us game series, is going to be heavily involved in the production of the television show. And that's what's happening right now. There's a threading that's going on. There's an appreciation that's going on. Part of it is business. Part of it is, you know, there's a lot of superheroes that have been mined. There's a lot of people that have tried to do Star Wars at that level and haven't quite hit that. And so a lot of movie studio folks and accountants are thinking, well, video games are very popular. Let's make TV shows and movies based on video games. So part of it is definitely that. But I think more importantly than that is that people that love creativity understand how creative video games can be. And video games have just taken the they're cues from movie making and storytelling and learnings of where to place cameras and how to transition from one scene to another and how to get the best performance from actors and how to create the best soundscapes and how to deal with surround sound enveloping a player so that when they hear something over here they know to turn over there. All of those lessons are from film, and there's a lot of moments in games that are either complete nods or rip-offs, however you want to frame it, of like super successful scenes in movies, and they're interpolated and positioned in games. But now we're seeing so much crossing over the other way, and a perfect example is Epic Games, the makers of Fortnite. They provide the Unreal Engine technology for game developers out there. But now, and I'm sure you know this, their real-time rendering engines are allowing filmmakers like the Jon Favreau and the team behind The Mandalorian to create virtual sets in real time on massive LED and LCD screens that are creating backgrounds that move with and track with camera movements, and it's game engine technology. So as much as games have borrowed from movies and have learned a lot of fantastic skills for storytelling, now the reverse is starting to happen. People are recognizing the value in and the importance of virtual reality applications for camera placement inside of virtual spaces, which will are either created on the fly in real time or will be rendered later on. So a lot of shots are being positioned that way, and it's one-to-one technology when you're working in a game. But now this screen technology, Mandalorian's currently using it. It's going to be adopted everywhere because it's efficient. You can create an outdoor environment where the light off the screens is reflected on helmets and on players' characters' eyeballs in movies, and it's incredibly fascinating. And honestly, I mean, we're getting so photoreal with game engine technology that it's only a matter of time where it's going to be indistinguishable on flat screens, and then eventually in holographic devices that make you feel like you're transported into a world where you're not going to know if the character that you're talking to is a human actor or a virtual replication of a human actor. And I'm sure there are going to be characters rendered and modeled and holographically projected into stages that movies are being made using game technology, where an actor will be talking to some kind of CG rendered creation and not know if there's a person inside of that suit.
Well, there is an actress recently, a virtual kind of character that was signed by a major agency to be a film star, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of virtual reality and augmented reality, which I see, those are definitely big things in gaming. Where do you think that's heading in terms of like using other senses like smell and taste and touch? I know there's been some attempts at like more physically embedding technologies and that to gaming.
I think that's it's kind of holy grail type technology. And I've gone to a ton of game developer conferences over the years, and I've seen various companies come forward with, first it was force feedback and then eventually it was, multi-layered feedback. So you'd put on vests and things and you could feel different. Like if somebody was shooting you or punching you, you could feel different parts of your body. But that drive towards full immersion and tactility and a sense of being displaced into the virtual world, not just through your eyes and your ears, is something that video game companies and technology companies are working on like crazy right now. I think these types of technologies almost revert us back to the arcade kind of idea. The arcade is in concept is the perfect testing ground for expensive technologies. It's the perfect beta test to see how a player or a consumer of this type of content would benefit from it or have some, negative reactions or negative feedback that would help to kind of further evolve it. Once we start to see like these location-based centers, and there have been some pretty cool ones. One of them is called the Void, where they actually have like a warehouse that's set up, and you can put on the virtual headset and walk around, knowing that you've got one-to-one walls and things that aren't the set that you're seeing inside of your headpiece inside of your headset. But the physicality is there. So they'll have, some like a wood table that has been put there, but then you might be on a space station and it will be in your headset, a gleaming white glass thing, or, some kind of sci-fi thing. So physically they've crafted the bones of what you're seeing in your headset. So, the next step obviously is to inject blasts of air and, some kind of concussive things that happen in different parts of your body, and then smells. And then you probably sit down at a table and pick up a virtual spoon and, you're eating some, I don't know, blue meat or something. I don't know.
So we're in the Matrix, basically, at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, the Holy Grail, the thing that we all would love to see is some kind of extrapolation of the X-Men's Danger Room or the holodeck from Star Trek. And every game maker was inspired by those kinds of ideas. But, because we can see them in our mind, we're moving towards that, And I've been thinking a lot about this with, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Elon Musk and others have posited that we are living in a video game simulation. We're living in some kind of super advanced hypercomputer kind of reality. I'm not suggesting that we are, but the act of suggesting that means we're moving towards that, and we may not be living in that, but I think we have a good chance of creating that. We might create life, at least virtually, in some kind of, like we already create cities with artificial intelligence that we get lost in games today, or in the case of Red Dead Redemption or Ghost of Tsushima, these open world environments where they feel pretty palpable and pretty realistic, by even with our modern understandings of the limitations of the non-player characters that we're encountering. We're only 40 years into this, if we move forward another 10, 20, 30, 100 years, the realities that we're going to be able to create in games are going to be indistinguishable from what we're walking around in. And that's frightening, but it's also exciting. And honestly, the idea of interstellar travel and projecting robots and figuring out, because it's not going to be humans that we're going to send on the first trips out of our solar system. It will be probes and robots and
Avatars.
machines, but avatars. So perfect, right? So imagine, we've got some super advanced ocular and sensory devices that we can get into, but we've got an avatar on another planet, and we're, for all intents and purposes, traveling there through them, and it's that kind of game thinking that's going to allow that, and that kind of familiarity with that language that is going to open our minds to those kinds of possibilities.
Well, let's talk a little bit about AI and machine learning as it applies to games. What are kind of the things you're seeing in terms of applications? And again, where do you think that's going to, 10 years from now, where are we going to be with that?
It's amazing. I think, the companies are certainly thinking of, because there's a lot of iteration that happens with development. There's a lot of building a tree, and then you got to build another tree. And then there's companies that come up, they're called, what are they called? Middleware companies that come up with, like rendering engines and whole technologies for creating a landscape where they'll create sort of the bone structure and the animation strings, so that non-player characters inside of a game world will all react properly if like a cannonball hits or something like that. And so AI, I think, is going to be at first the first steps to kind of simplifying mass development and populating game worlds with art and design pieces that augment creative inspiration. But of course, these intelligences will only grow exponentially. And what will be interesting and also a little terrifying when you think about the potential is to think of the eventual artificially generated through computer learning full-on experiences that I think it's only a matter of time that. And honestly, one of my greatest fears, Catherine, is that we become a species that is computers making games for computers. Like I like the fact that the computers allow us, there are tools for us to reach some really cool potentials, but I don't want it to be so artificial that the human experience, the human creative impulse isn't a part of all of this. But you can kind of predict that at some point in the future, someone is going to market and sell this game was made entirely by artificial intelligence, and good luck, and that sounds scary as hell, but there's a lot of other things that AI is working on that are probably more terrifying than the video game stuff that we're going to be thinking about. Absolutely. Right now, it is a useful tool set for solving problems, whether it's a resource issue or a game space issue. Like, perfect example is when does Google Maps intersect with Grand Theft Auto? When can you just take the idea of zipping around the world map and then land in that city, and then you're getting into a car virtually, and you're driving around in a real thing, and then you get out of the car, and then you walk into any house that you see on the street, and it's all fully rendered and modeled, and then you get back into the car and you drive to an apartment building and you visit every apartment, and they're all rendered differently.
That's a great training tool. What you're saying is it's a great training tool for somebody who might want to steal cars or rob apartments. Right? You try it virtually first, and then
well, those impulses and those instincts are a latent part of humanity and always have been. We have darkness in each of us, as we continually discover every day that we breathe air on this planet. But one of the beautiful things about the design of Grand Theft Auto and other games like that is that you can choose not to do that too. And what blows critics and game fanatics like myself away is the freeform nature of their design and the potential that kind of creates for us as players. And the limitations have been that we can't walk into every building, and we can't. We see a lot of repetition in design aesthetics. What AI introduces is a lot of algorithmic disparity and a surprise. Eventually, we're not quite there yet, but we're going to see some pretty cool. I think it's about games becoming bigger and broader and more expensive and more challenging for just a human to make. And we're already at 1,000-person teams in video games. We're already, at parity almost with the biggest movie studios out there. When you're talking about the blockbuster movie or a blockbuster game, budgets and manpower, they're getting close, and I think that there will be some ceilings where, it's just going to be very hard for even the most efficient and disciplined publishers to kind of wrap their minds around, how do you make this army make this thing, that always blows me away, whether it's a giant movie or a giant game. It's like, how did you get all of those people moving in that singular direction,
There's so much money that goes into, developing new technologies in gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing happens in film. And of course, film, as you mentioned, uses a lot of the technologies that come from gaming. Can you think of other examples of where that technology that was initially developed for the gaming world is then used as application for other things?
Well, the engine tech. Well, first of all, like games are teaching humans a language, so you can see the influence of games in every app that you click on, whether they're game related or not. You can see them in the UI of every computer screen. You can see them at banking terminals. You can see them in television commercials. You can like this is there are generations of us now that have a real affinity and a real recognition. It's not just nostalgia. It's like it's a vibrant way to live, to think about accomplishments in through the prism of playing a game, and honestly, that's one of the ways that video games really succeed. They really kind of like one of the biggest successes of this year is Animal Crossing, and it's a game that really doesn't introduce anything that we can't do in the real world, but it does it in such a clever and accessible way, and it was so valuable during this stay-at-home period, this pandemic time, to be able to escape to our little islands and build up our communities on these little islands, and then visit other people's islands. So we're seeing the influence of games across almost every sector, but the technologies in games also allow, like, we're years away from a real-time animation film festival, whereas opposed to, where that real-time quality of the animation, meaning that you can move the camera anywhere you want to as a participant in watching this animation, that will look better than what Disney and Pixar are putting out right now. We're years away from something like that. And we're years away from companies like Disney and Pixar utilizing that engine tech and that kind of design and technology in their work. I mean, the fact that Lucasfilm is doing that right now with The Mandalorian is going to ripple, just like everything that Lucasfilm has always done. It's going to ripple all the way across the industry. We're going to see that tech in superhero movies and other sci-fi things, and all kinds of fantasy. And then eventually, like especially the visual effects industry, you don't even know when you're watching something with visual effects anymore, because we've just become so it's become so prevalent and accepted and important as part of creating that frame. And game engine tech will be a part of that kind of thinking as well. It's already a huge part of the commercial industry. When you watch a lot of car commercials and stuff, those aren't cars; those are rendered video game models at super high resolution, and they're put onto a road that might also be rendered. It's very easy for people to recreate vehicles in CG, and it's going to become increasingly easier for filmmakers and visual storytellers to create real-time vehicles and reposition. Like right now, there's a lot of rendering that happens after the fact, and shots are very explicitly framed. Pretty soon, those vehicles and those environments are going to be so photoreal, you can blow them up onto an 8K screen, and you won't be able to tell the difference whether that tank or that plane or that car is really a physical thing or not. And so much traffic stuff that you see right now, so many collisions and accidents, and you see cars in movies and TV shows just explode in crazy fireballs and stuff that would blow our minds if we used to watch the A-Team back on TV back in the day, and suddenly like cars are just thrown around like they're like Hot Wheels. Well, they're all generated in a computer, and so they might have one physical element of one car hitting something, but then all of these other pieces are placed into the scene. So we're going to see a lot more of that. And obviously we're going to see a lot more really beautifully rendered CG characters that are going to look a lot more like the stuff that Marvel's been doing with the de-aging technology has been insane, right? Like, to see Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas pop up in an Ant-Man movie, and like, holy crap, they look perfect. They look exactly like they used to look.
A little less with De Niro.
Yeah, a little less with De Niro. Yeah. You're focused on that, but we soon we won't be, and soon, we've had digital characters like Jeff Bridges in Tron and Luke and Leia in the Star Wars movies, which have had varying degrees of success. But you're seeing the deep fake technology. You know, there's a lot of AI assisted and real time assisted rendering that's happening, and it's just going to get insane. And like I think you know there's some interesting side by sides that we're going to be able to do between CG Yoda in the prequel Star Wars movies, Puppet Yoda in the classic Star Wars movies, Puppet Yoda being brought back for the more recent, and then what a theoretical Yoda in a Star Wars film 10 years from now is going to be, you know, some amalgam of the puppetry and I mean, we're seeing even with the Baby Yoda, the tech that's in the Baby Yoda. It was, it was a lot of times a puppet in the traditional sense. But I don't know if you heard about any of Werner Herzog's interactions with the thing, but he was basically crying on set. You know, this filmmaker that has been making cool movies forever. He was just like, this is the most beautiful creation ever, and he knew intrinsically that was going to become this massive sensation out there, and that it was the whole heart of the success of the show, and it's what people talked about everywhere, and it was the work that went into crafting that little character. But I think that we're going to have holographically projected real-time puppets in working with actors, shot on cameras, probably VR cameras of some kind, and then like post-processing and post-effects and all that stuff that we think of right now is still very two-dimensional. Like we take a scene that's shot this way and that way and this way. When we're talking about VR cinematography and cameras and using real-time engines and all that stuff, suddenly you're thinking 4D, like placements and lights and all of that stuff is all manipulable, and that's all game making, and it's gonna get wild, especially as head-mounted display technologies get more advanced, and people are just flipping on a pair of glasses or contact lenses. Like imagine if you popped on contact lenses and it was the same sensation as putting on a heads-up display, and so you could see the VR space that you were interacting with.
Or the AR space,
or the AR space, yeah.
I'm quite excited about that, actually, also from not even just from a gaming point of view, but if we have these contact lenses that are AR, and I'm walking out in the real world and I'm going to get information about buildings that I see. Maybe I'll know who the architect is, or
totally.
All this data, I think, is quite fascinating. And I think, Google Glasses was an attempt that failed because there were glasses and they're clunky, but that kind of heads-up display is a totally different situation.
Yes.
That once they figure out how to do that, that's something that's going to make it a little bit more usable. Although deepfakes kind of terrify me, I have to say.
There's a lot of technology that's freaky, and also our addiction to it, like we are. That's not new, though. I mean, I think when people first started printing books, I am sure people were like, "Stop reading! You're always reading. What are you doing? Get out there! Go plow that field. Why are you always reading books?" And radio. I'm sure there were a lot of people just like, "Why are you always here listening to the radio?" But yeah, we as humans, we need to constantly remind ourselves that we are organic and we need stimulation in many ways, not just.
The TV will rot your brain.
TV will rot your brain. Rock and roll, comic books.
Yeah.
Movies. I mean, the thing that's weird about the 20th and 21st centuries is that we've had it all so fast, and so many transformations, and so much media just constantly shifting. It's I don't think there are generations going back in time that have had to deal with this much transition, so technological transition so quickly. And so, of course, we've got generations of people just completely shocked and terrified and, vilifying what's coming up because they don't understand it, of course.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of games rotting your brain, actually, of all things, I did like a story for Playboy of all publications, and it was about how games can actually improve your brain. So they improve things like, your skills, reaction time, logical thinking, spatial planning. So are games the ultimate playground for our minds?
I think there's something to be said for staying sharp when you're puzzle solving. I mean, you have to think of games. First they were 2D puzzles that we had to solve and had to kind of navigate through. And when we got into that Z plane and started to think about 3D navigation, it's pretty profound. It's a pretty big deal to manipulate a character or your avatar if it's a first person experience through a three-dimensional playground and survive. And I think that there's something to be said for humans being able to pick up a control device of whatever kind of manifestation, and figure out how to provide the correct inputs and the right button presses to solve this puzzle box that a developer has crafted. And they've obviously gotten more advanced and more sophisticated and more complex and more challenging. And I think that constant engagement with that mental stimulation is incredibly important. And at the same time, the storytelling, as we've talked about, has gotten much deeper and much more mature and much more multi-layered in a lot of titles. And that also energizes the mind to think of things empathetically as well. And I think that there's an emotional intelligence that sort of gets ignited by good quality content like that. So I'm a big believer that if you're not engaged in the world, there's great stories that will energize your emotions and your intelligence and your tools to analyze and discuss. But I think there is also a lot of pablum. There's a lot of entertainment out there that you just put it on. And I mean, when I was a kid, this is kind of embarrassing, but I used to love the Love Boat show, and it wasn't because I was learning anything from it. It just felt like I'd come home from school at 3:00 and I'd turn on television and Love Boat was in syndication. And I would just I thought it was just cool that all these celebrities from different things were on the show. But there was not, I was learning nothing from that show. It was just pablum. It was just this comfort food. And that exists in games. Games aren't perfect. But I think it exists a lot more in sedentary, passive, just watching stuff. I mean, I think that's the only way you can sort of justify the existence of things like Real Housewives of New York or whatever. I know that people love that kind of content, but I just feel like it's just a lot of noise, and there's a lot of noise out there. But games do, once you are invested, they do ask you to lean in and solve them, and constantly analyze. You're a participant. You are part of that engagement. So, of course, it's going to not only, get you to think of things in 3D space and work some of your physical manipulation and your puzzle solving skills, but I think, because it's such a constantly evolving medium, and it's like the rules are set for like a couple of years and people follow a thing, and then you see a lot of games that look like that game. But then the table is wiped a lot, and then suddenly a new way to think about video games erupts. A great example is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which used a lot of interesting elements from previous games that might have borrowed from Zelda, but it was a very different Zelda game than every other Zelda game that had come before it. And it has become incredibly influential in the video game industry. And in a great sense of the term, it wiped the table and said, this is what Zelda is now in 2017. And that's why I do what I do. I've been covering games for 25 years and I love it. I wake up every day. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen today. I don't know what new, Epic is suing Apple and Google right now because they won't let them have their terms on selling currency within Fortnite. And Fortnite has been removed off of Android and iOS, and it's a huge deal in the video game industry. But that is the industry. Like every day, it's like, what is happening, and how is this game a reality? And oh my God, have you played this? It's awesome.
There's a great trend too towards gamifying pretty much everything at this point, from
Yeah.
educating for educational purposes, but also for things like meditation. I have a headset. I think it's called Muse, and you can, it tells you if your mind is calm.
Yeah. That's
Basically
cool.
wearing this headset, so it's quite interesting in terms of these applications. Now, I'm wondering, from your vast experience with different kinds of games, from a technological point of view, what are some of the most exciting things you've seen so far?
Mm. We're on a bit of a plateau, honestly. I feel like we're talking about grabbing stuff off of hard drives a little bit quicker, and so stuff is rendered quicker, and which is going to be great. I mean, the fact that you're going to go into a huge open world, and you're not going to have to wait for loading, and you're going to be able to traverse in a million different directions, and it's all open to you is very exciting. But we're not at a sense of oh my God, we haven't seen this idea before. I think what's on the horizon is this slimming down of the technology that we're going to need for artificial displacement, that virtual reality, augmented reality type of experience. I think with games, it seems a little bit to make a little bit more sense to think of virtual reality, because it's cool to think that Space Invaders or something is going to come into your peripheral vision in this reality and screw with your mind a little bit. But I think it's more exciting to put yourself on another planet, and deal with what that reality is going to be. But I think some of the big stumbling blocks technologically are the fact that we've got these wires and cables that we can get, tangled up in, and we've got controllers that are really cool, but maybe not quite the same as wearing a pair of gloves that, give you that same tactility. But I think we're over a couple of really small hills, and we're there. I think once Apple finally releases their AR glasses and gives us a sense of projection on something very light and very portable, that is just going to, like all the stuff that Apple does, they sort of craft this consumer experience that people adopt, and then other technology companies take from that and come up with their own variations of that. I think a virtual reality experience that's as small as a light pair of glasses that's going to be profound. I think that's going to be, like, if people could play the VR experience of like Half-Life Alyx, which came out this year, but they didn't have to wear a big bulky headset and have it plugged into a noisy PC, they would be blown away, because it's amazing, But right now, you need to spend a couple $1,000s at least, and clear everything out of your house, and have the room to do it, and not get any motion sickness in VR.
Or go to
There's
an
a lot of
abandoned
hurdles.
warehouse,
Yeah.
And then now we're talking about serial killer games, which I do not condone. Just kidding.
Yeah.
If you could snap your fingers, this was my attempt at snapping my fingers. It was a little bit failed.
Okay.
If I
Okay.
properly snapped my fingers and
Yes.
you could have any piece of technology, what would it be, and how would you use it, like, to create your perfect gaming experience?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, that's such a broad question, because the tech that really excites me is this idea of exploring other worlds, and games allow us to do that. But if you gave me the freedom to ask the genie for one wish, it would be to safely travel to other stars and other planets, and to see all of that. Games allow us to do that, So I guess it would be light, feather light VR technology that allowed for lots of different types of game variation, but also the actual physical space to get the most out of that experience. to never think about bumping into anything, to just be completely transported. I think that would be very exciting. That being said, though, one of the great sins of the video game industry is to always be forward thinking and always be looking forward. And it has a great, unlike Hollywood, it has it has a great history. The video game business does, of forgetting its history. And there is this constant, got to buy the new console, and it doesn't work with the old console. Got to buy all the new controllers. The new controllers are better than the old controllers. And so we have a lot of this, clutterware at this point. And something that excites me currently, and I would like to see it extrapolated even further, is either a digital archive of the history of the business, because there's a lot of value in looking back and appreciating where we've come from. And a lot of those games are terrific. Or more work done to archive the physical works that we're moving away from. Like, I've got a collection of, a massive collection of games, but we're slowly moving away from physical media across the board, and that includes in video games as well. And so consequently, we have tons of discs and cartridges, humans around the world, that we have to kind of preserve antiquated old systems for. And I just wish that new technology was there to utilize old content in effective ways, and to preserve it, to protect it and preserve it in some way. And so physical hardware like that would be amazing, but also digital archival of that content would be great.
Yeah, I love that, actually. That's a great thought. So I have this question. It's my last question to you, and it's become sort of a bit of a signature question that I ask all my guests on the series, since we did talk about it in the context of gaming, just in terms of anything. What do you personally, Victor Lucas, look forward to in the future, 10 years from now? And it could be anything, technology or not.
I look forward to, we've talked a lot today about the potential of this technology to entertain us, and our efforts as a species to harness great power to stimulate ourselves in some really fascinating ways. But we have a lot of things that we have to look after on this planet. And so what I hope is that with all of this machine learning and all of this technological advancement and understanding, is that we figure out some ways so that, certainly this planet is cared for and the environment is taken care of, and that people can be healthy everywhere. And honestly, I also feel like we as a species have the ability to, be a source of light and hopefulness on this planet. And if we play our cards right, maybe across other planets. And that excites the hell out of me, And my kid has said since she was a very young girl that she's wanted to be an astronaut. And I feel like a lot of people are going to get the chance to be astronauts in the not too distant future if we play our cards right. And I just hope that the outer space missions that inevitably will be occurring and be human powered aren't because people are racing away from whatever we have done here.
We're not going away. We're going towards something.
Yeah. I think we're an incredible species. Like we have some amazing gifts, and it's in our entertainment. We can see it. These stories and these poems and these songs and these games that lift us. And it's incredible that we can communicate that stuff and be so moved by them, right? And so in that, there is this, this profound potential. And I that's what I hope. As much as I want to keep playing cool things, and I've had the luxury of doing that forever, I also hope that we are smart enough to take care of this planet and each other, and eventually share that. you know?
That's really great. In some ways, it kind of strikes me that our imaginations are kind of in the same way, infinite in the same way that space is, because space is
Yeah.
don't know that there is a limit, and
Yep.
neither do our imaginations. And that is something that we find within the art and arts that we create, and including gaming. So
Yep.
we are exploring space at home sometimes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, and honestly, like when you get into it all, like we've always used technology to convey stories, always. And it's I think it's very representational of um, the emotional value that we have as humans. You know, like it's great that we can create things to progress us and to give us creature comforts and uh, wealth. But I think it's equally important that we have like emotional or spiritual uh, wealth in expressing, you know, these stories through something that we're all able to understand. You know, there's something so powerful in that, you know, like, and so singular. Like we haven't encountered another species that, I mean, we don't know. Maybe the dolphins tell stories to each other, but it feels like we have this very precious gift, you know, not just to be smart, but to be empathetic. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much for being part of this. This is really fascinating, and I'm just so
No,
curious to see where this all takes us into the
me
future.
too.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so much
much.
for having me, Catherine.
Thank you.